this out of the picture. I don't know why
That's
I've done
I feel great.
Huh. Michael, where's the share screen? Oh, here we go. Found it.
Better if I close this.
Yeah, it probably would be.
Okay, are you seeing one screen, I hope? Kerr humor.
Looks good.
Okay, all right. Just from last week, we ended with Kerr humor. He's going to need it in the coming week. This was the YouTube of him joking about bailing out Michael Jordan. But there's another YouTube that has a whole compilation of his humor. So that's available to you. And then, as Jim Teisel was pointing out, the Warriors didn't do well. Curry, we told you his life story along with Kerr's life story, and he continues to do well, but his teammates kind of let him down, and that's all I'm going to say. So last week I had a few.
John?
Wait just a second.
John?
Yes.
Does everyone know you attended the game?
I was going to try to elide over that, Jim, but if you insist.
Well, this
right,
is a
all
close-knit group.
All right, Jim. It's good to have Jim. Jim and I work together, and this has always been our relationship. Before we got to San Diego, we stopped in LA and visited family and friends. And Tim's birthday is today, in fact. And for his birthday present, I took him to the Lakers-Warriors game in LA. And so I was there, but I had nosebleed seats, and I couldn't. We couldn't see the disaster unfolding. All right, that's all I'm going to say. And now, Jim, I'm going to go on to you and what you've contributed. I've always been trying to get people to contribute bits of local history that they run across, signs, markers, statues, show and tell. You're welcome here. We've done it from time to time over the last 3 years. We've covered such topics as Leonardo da Vinci, Florence, downtown Lafayette, wonderful things like that. So Jim sent me this, and Jim's contributed a lot today, in addition to embarrassing me. And he sent this, a dedication of the George Miller Jr. Bridge. It's now Memorial Bridge because he died. And it was the first automobile bridge across the Carquinez Straits. George Miller Jr. So also known as George Miller II. And George Miller II was a big guy. He was Pat Brown's campaign manager and a shaker and mover in Democrat politics. He's from Martinez, as is his son, as you'll hear in a minute. So this is his bridge right here. And it was in the late 60s. He died a couple of years later at a very young age, late 50s, of a heart attack epidemic, which also took my father. And so, but the first automotive bridge, but not the first bridge. So there's 3 bridges going across. And the middle bridge is the railroad bridge, which is historic as well, as is the bridge on the left, which we'll get to. You can see Mount Diablo in the background. So we're on the Benicia side looking south. So the railroad bridge. Here is a mural that shows the railroad bridge in around 1930 when it was built. And the significance of the railroad bridge is it allowed goods that were being shipped from south to north to stop going on ferries. The end of the road for the railroad was Port Costa, which those of us that live here know quite well. Very picturesque town that time forgot in the 1930s, basically. And the ferry was landed here and took goods from the end of the railroad across to Benicia. So all this is California history, right? So that's my justification. But the ferries stopped there. The railroad couldn't continue beyond Port Costa through Martinez across the bridge to destinations north. So I like to show this slide. It's the upper half of a mural. For people, especially residents who have driven past it for their 3 years here in their residency, because it's painted under Highway 4, and this is the road, Alhambra, that leads to the hospital, and that panel that I just showed you is from this bridge, and it's amazing how few people have stopped to look at the panel. And so when I do the history of California, you'll see each of these panels separate because they go from cattle days all the way up to the 19.
Could you repeat where that is, John?
So it's under Highway 4 that runs past Martinez. Okay.
How long have they been there?
I think about 30 years, 20.
John, you know, there's a new one farther up about a half a mile when I used to bike home. That's got John Muir in the wilderness, and it shows the oil fields. You know that one?
Oh, okay. Let's include that, David. Between you and me, that's our mission. Okay. Now it's time to get to the third bridge, the bridge on the left. And this is dedicated to George Miller III, George Miller II's son. And this is the only pair of bridges next to each other named after father and son in the country. I mean, go figure. But there you are. And those of us that live in Contra Costa just have kind of blindly gone across these bridges, not understanding the history. So who's George Miller III? Why do you name a bridge after him? Because he was Nancy Pelosi's second in command. He was in the room where it happened for Obamacare. And there he is over there. And you'll remember famously Nancy Pelosi opposed people that wanted to downsize of Obama's healthcare reform. She called it kiddie care. And so she, with the help of George Miller III, shepherded it through. I'll mention Jim Teisel in passing here. Jim's brother, John, also a doctor, he has a sailboat in Richmond, and that's where George Miller the second, I think, was raised. He eventually wound up in Martinez. And he invited me to go sailing with George Miller III. We had a secret mission, which was to get him to endorse a friend's initiative to make the Miwok Grinding Rock State Park into a World Heritage Site. More about that later. And this is important to us because this is in our family practice clinic. We have, a showcase with interesting things in the history of our hospital. And this is Obama's letter to George Miller III, thanking him for supporting Nancy Pelosi. And he says, couldn't have done it without you. So there's a link, as I tell the residents, between our hospital and Obamacare. Because, and what is that link? The founder of our residency program was a buddy of George Miller II, and was around George Miller II's house when George Miller III was growing up, a kind of an uncle. So there were a lot of Georges, two George Millers and one George Degnan. And that's because he was the founder of our residency program. The history of that goes back to World War II, because the founder of our residency program volunteered during the Blitz. And when I present the history of the residency, this is the link between the beginning of the residency and Obamacare. Jim has been a very active contributor, and he sent me this article, which I thought qualified for show and tell. Real quick, this is a doctor at UC Davis who has, on his own initiative and with support of administration, made UC Davis a model for post-affirmative action, because that's what we're looking at, isn't it? But UC Davis doesn't need it, because this guy came up with a very innovative way of taking the challenge. This is what's going to be happening at the end of the year: ban all race-conscious admissions problem. But this guy, Henderson, created a workaround, getting to the deeper socioeconomic core problem, a genius move, and he figured it out. And so UC Davis is the most diverse medical school in the country, 52% qualifying by the definition down here. And so there it is. Eight out of 10 UC Davis medical students come from economically disadvantaged, not racial, economic. And that's the core problem, isn't it? And so this documents all this, and their admissions committee look on the essays for evidence of struggle, the evidence of distance traveled from their childhood to their qualifying to go to med school. And this is all other criteria that are used besides race: the parental occupation, family income, geography, or on welfare. And it's a proxy for grit and perseverance. So that is this guy, Henderson. And thank you, Jim, for sending that. All right. So any other comments on show and tell before we get to the main menu? All right, on to besides it being my son's birthday today, it's also Russia's Victory Day. And Russia celebrated a Victory Day parade for those of us who are rooting for Ukraine. It's a day of Schadenfreude, because Putin has created a cult out of Victory Day to bolster his legitimacy over the last 23 years. Stalin had created Victory Day, celebrating his triumph over Nazis. But Putin has made Victory Day into what some describe as a secular religion, just proving that Russia is invincible and righteous. And in Soviet traditions, usually, we've seen it in the past as we were growing up, they would, in the Cold War, roll out all the military hardware on Victory Day. And then you'd see the Immortal Regiment, marches of citizens who would join with portraits of their ancestors. Important part of Victory Day in former years, but not today. Why? Because of the questionable status of Ukraine, and there's been unbelievable number of Russian casualties. There have already been some protests of mothers that have been low key, and they decided not to have the march because they didn't want to show, they just finessed it. They didn't want to show too many families who've lost soldiers to this war. The theme of Victory Day, Putin added that the Ukrainians would be the stand-in for the Nazis. He thought, okay, we need a villain in this, a current day villain in the Victory Day parade celebrating World War II's victory over Hitler. Let's see. Oh, okay, we've got Nazis in Ukraine. Also in today's parade, there are also not families carrying portraits of dead soldiers, but there's also no hardware. Why? Because it's in Ukraine. There's no flyover. Why? Because they're worried about security and sabotage. That's one theory. I'm saying maybe some controversial stuff I can't prove, but I'm trying to present a point of view. And also today, well, no, this was Friday. This is Prigozhin. We've talked about him in the past. He's the head of the Wagner Group. Now, if you can find a bigger villain in the modern world than Prigozhin, let me know. But he is the guy who has taken charge of prisoners and turned them into fighters. And he runs the Wagner Group, which is sending a pretty ruthless Russian mercenaries, think Hell's Angels types, all around the world, particularly in Africa. Mali, they really hold, the Wagner Group holds the balance of power. And Prigozhin has been trying to take Bakhmut. You've probably heard about Bakhmut. The Russians have been after Bakhmut, I don't know, 6 months, 5 months. And it was going to be Wagner's triumph because he's using these prisoners to take Bakhmut. And you wonder, Bakhmut's not that strategic, but no Ukrainian wanted to give the Wagner Group or Prigozhin a win. And so the casualties have been reported as high as 10-1, probably average somewhere around 5-1. That's average. There have been some months where it's been even Steven. But Prigozhin hasn't been able to take Bakhmut 100%. He's got it 85%, but the Ukrainians are just not giving him a victory. And part of it was to hold out for Victory Day. And they did it. Maybe they'll retreat. But now Wagner a group, they've taken so many casualties, 10-1. These poor prisoners who all they had to do was live 6 months and they'd be paroled. But a lot of them have died. Well, that, you lose some prisoners. What's the cost of that, right? But Prigozhin's inability to take Bakhmut, who's he blaming? The Russian military for not sending him enough ammunition. So he's gone very public, and Friday in a profanity-laced video just lit into the Russian military establishment, blaming them for his inability to take Bakhmut. So Ukraine, they've made a lot of sacrifices to keep Bakhmut, but if one of their goals was to create a split within Russian fighting men, they've done it. So that was Friday. He was part of his video. He's standing in front of dead Wagner soldiers. And he even threatened Friday to retreat from Bakhmut. The Russian military tried to assuage him, and they said, okay, I won't. But today, apparently, he said they're abandoning Bakhmut, and he launched another scathing attack today on Victory Day. Now, I haven't confirmed this. This is taken off of the Telegraph Ukraine, the latest podcast. And Bob has pointed out to us that the Telegraph is further to the right than most. Nevertheless, I find their podcasts very informative, and they do have a strong point of view, which is the same point of view as Timothy Snyder, basically, that Carol introduced us to a year and a half ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. And so thank you for that, Carol. That continues to pay off. The other person that would endorse that point of view is Yuval Harari. And our group has study group, when we were meeting monthly with Ramsey, has read a couple of Harari's books. He's the guy that wrote *Sapiens*, which Obama touted and made a big splash with *Sapiens*, starting at the very beginning, humans 200,000 years ago and up. And he thinks and makes the point, I sent out the essay, I hope some of you read it, that the greatest political achievement of *Sapiens* has been the decline of the war, of fighting wars. Now, looking at analysis, I now split people into reformers and conservatives, or if you want, utopians and realists. There's all, but the two mindsets are basically the same. And it's the reformers and utopians say, hey, we got to change. And it can be in many different contexts, not just international, but within this country. And we certainly have a split today, a polarization between maybe people like me that are more reformer utopians and conservatives and realists. And it's hard to fit Trump into either one, and I won't. The realists and the conservatives and Kissinger and Mearsheimer would qualify, saying history repeats itself endlessly. Humans for forever condemned. Maybe that's an overstatement for somebody like Kissinger's, but per Harari's definition, these realists think that we're condemned to reenact past tragedies. That the world is a jungle, the strong prey on the weak, military force is essential to keep from being conquered. It's how it always has been. And these people tend to argue for sphere of influence, as Mearsheimer is doing with Russia and Ukraine. That Crimea and Ukraine has been in Russia's sphere of influence for a couple of centuries, and we need to recognize that. The utopians, particularly Harari, counters that this law of the jungle is not a natural law at all. And Harari points out, and I'm a little bit puzzled by this, he says as a point in his favor that warfare only appeared 13,000 years ago. I'm not sure what to make of that. But the next couple of slides are just examples of prehistoric warfare. Harari's point is humans made war as part of their culture, and they can change their culture. Early evidence of warfare, cave paintings of archers in Spain, probably killed in warfare. The 8,500-year-old Kennewick man found in the North American Northwest. Then there was this famous guy found in the ice of that was melting in the European Alps, and it turned out he was a warrior. These days, most recently, there have been 7 decades of peace, and Harari takes that as a great positive. The direct violence between superpowers hasn't happened. And of course, that's mutual assured destruction, which he's a little bit silent on. Not sure that's should be evidence of a change in human nature. And then earlier than that, he said there's been long periods that have been devoid of war. And he's saying, so it's not a natural force. Well, what was going on in those periods? There was cultural change. One argument that we've run across is the era of the Earth Mother, and where before Greek times and prehistoric times, there was cultures, particularly one in Turkey, that had an Earth Mother. And could this have been periods of human history where the females' sensibilities were dominant instead of the male? And part of these arguments is, unfortunately, that one thing that got away from the maternal culture was the Judeo-Christian revolution. We can talk about that. That's very controversial. But it's worth a mention. You look at Greek history and Sybil. She was a continuation of this earlier Turkish Earth Mother from a very large city in Turkey, I think 7,000 years BCE. So Harari makes the point that what can account for this 70 years of peace? And he thinks that maybe global economy has changed, and he sees that as a hope in the future, that now knowledge is the basis of wealth, no longer material goods. And so you can fight physically over physical goods, but in the future, knowledge is going to be the basis of wealth, which is harder to gain by conquest. And so the profitability of conquest has declined. An interesting argument. So he says our culture itself has changed. We no longer glorify war as our culture and artistic world did in the past.
So John,
Yeah.
John, I might interrupt. If you replace on the previous slide knowledge with the word intelligence, then you link these two articles that you sent us.
Okay.
And that's a little scary. If you
yeah. Yeah. And Harari addresses this at the end of the essay. Kinda. Thank you, Homer.
Oh, you're welcome.
And so Mussolini and strong leaders in the past sought to immortalize themselves, aggrandize themselves. And what's not mentioned in these articles of elites are the Tokugawas. We've got a few people on this call that are with Japanese heritage. And when you look at the Tokugawas, there are 250 years of peace in Japan, saw a flourishing of the arts. So many of the traditional Japanese arts were established, flower arranging, things like that, all traced back to the Tokugawa peace. So that's the flip side of fascism, if you will, and the only way to describe Tokugawa was as a fascist state. So a lot of our arts and Harari mentions specifically Homer and Shakespeare are about warfare. Henry V for sure, the Iliad for sure, and the Christian Church stood by. Yeah, war is evil, but it's inevitable. What are you going to do? And this is a Ramsey slide showing a contrasting way that two different cultures celebrated warfare. This is Achilles in the Iliad. This is Arjuna in the Mahabharata. And this is just a map showing the history of the movements of people as a result of armed conflict, as shown by the archaeological record. These people didn't move around always peacefully. We don't have enough time to go into the detail of warfare. We could do a whole year on that. So both of these stories from ancient stories written a long time ago showed epic battles, and both of them were over beautiful women. So there's something about that. Helen, and then the Ramayana. What was her name? Aiko? I forget. But the lessons, as Ramsey pointed out, are opposed. In Achilles, it's personal pride and warrior skill and individualism, and the Greeks are going to be victorious and remembered. And if you think of Shakespeare's Henry V, that's exactly what Henry V is, right? Where were you on St. Crispin's Day, that famous soliloquy? Your grandchildren will ask you, and you'll tell them where you were on St. Crispin's Day, that you were in Agincourt. The Indian version of this victory is so different. In the Bhagavad Gita, talking about this, there's a moment where Arjuna, who is the avatar of Vishnu, going Hindu on us, has this dialogue, and the dialogue says, yeah, I'm required to fight. That's my destiny. That's my role. I've got to win, and there's going to be great suffering in all this. But this misery is of no cosmic significance. A very passive approach to what's going on. And of course, the reform movement out of Hinduism is Buddhism, right? Just the Buddhism is to Hinduism as Protestantism is to Catholicism. No cosmic importance. Historically, the axial age, it's interesting. You have all these philosophers, and we've gone over them all in detail before, but I flashed them up just not to go over them individually, but all at about the same time, they came up with, hey, let's think if there's another way of thinking. And why? What preceded this was the Iron Age. And the Iron Age, humans figured out ways to carry out more devastating warfare. So that's just one broad brush theory of why the axial age happened in so many different places with all these different spiritual leaders. Incredible. But one person that stood out for me in this 3-year history through of the world was Ashoka. He was a successful conqueror, and then at the end of one battle, he said, "What have I done?" And he abdicated and became a monk. But they first put up pillars all around. He had been affected, obviously, by Buddhism and converted. Buddhism had its heyday around Ashoka, and arguably the greatest Buddhist convert. There were others that also rulers who adopted Buddhism. My favorite is the Kushans, the last of the Indo-European steppe tribes who swept down and established a Greco-Indian empire. They promulgated Buddhism across the Silk Road. So we encountered the Kushans when we read the Silk Road book. Today, Harari makes the claim, and I find some of this hard to swallow, For the first time in history, the world became dominated by an elite who see war as evil. Even, and he says, the likes of George Bush. And do you agree? I don't. Iraq in 2003 was pivotal. Disappointing to me, disappointing to what's now called the global South, the hypocrisy. It's come back and it's bitten us in the ass. It was us violating international law. And you know who else was pissed off? Putin. And so he'd been acting president as of actually New Year's Eve, 1999. He was upset about a number of things. He thought that he's definitely of the realist philosophy. That doesn't make him evil. He's evil now, but initially there's a sphere of influence, and Russia had a sphere of influence. And he thought the greatest tragedy was the fall of the Soviet Union. And you know who agreed with him? Not necessarily always, but certainly in the timing of it, was Henry Kissinger. How do we know this? Putin was, after the fall of the Soviet Union, he fled, had to flee Germany, where he was a KGB agent, and went back to his home, St. Petersburg, and was involved in really the reform of St. Petersburg after the fall of the Soviet Union. And we've gone over that in detail in previous episodes, all of which are on tape, by the way. He, at one point, he was the assistant to the mayor, and the mayor of St. Petersburg says, you know, we're trying to get businesses going here. We've got some American consultants who are helping us. Oh, and could you pick up a consultant today at the airport? And that was Henry Kissinger. And he reports in his autobiography the ride from the airport, just him and Henry Kissinger, and that Henry Kissinger decried the sudden loss of Soviet influence, that it was going to destabilize the region, and he's a realist, and that upset him at how quickly it went. I'm not saying he thought forever and a day, but how quickly it went, the speed. And so that influenced Putin a lot, as did NATO's 1999 intervention in Serbia. Clinton couldn't get approval of the United Nations, so because of Russia's veto, so he didn't even try. He leveraged NATO in the intervention of Serbia. Why? To prevent another Rwanda. That's what he thought he was dealing with Milosevic. Putin says America did that without UN Security Council sanctions. So this was kind of the training wheels version of what would later happen in Iraq. He, in his biography, he saw the fellow Slavic people in Serbia, of which Milosevic was one, being attacked by NATO, and there was an implied threat even then to dismember Russia. But he forgave that, and in 9/11 was the first one to call George W. Bush after 9/11. And then 2 months later, he and his wife traveled to the United States because he was also fighting his own Islamic jihadists in Chechnya, right? And he was learning how to put down an uprising, and he destroyed Chechnya to save it, which is disturbing, as we see with the constant bombing of Ukraine. And he met with Putin, with George W. Bush, and I think this is when George Bush looked into his eyes and saw that he had a soul. You'll remember that comment. But it was really the second Iraq War in 2003. And then later, George W. Bush touted Georgia and Ukraine to join NATO, so that raised up his back a little bit. There's so much more detail to talk about. I'm just delighting going over this very quickly with a broad brush. But he was further offended by our interventions in Libya and Syria, which were done with the, again, with always lurking in the background for us all is the history of Rwanda. And the United Nations even developed a norm for the obligation to protect. If you see a minority in a country being threatened with genocide, there is an obligation to protect them internationally. So that's kind of become a norm in international law. But after the bombing of Serbia and the invasion of Iraq, all done against international norms, Putin interprets that very differently than we do. Harari makes the point that the realm of art has changed away from senseless horror, which is how Harari would see the mindset around the Iliad and the Mahabharata, that war is terrible. And here's Guernica, familiar to all of us. So he also makes the statement, most governments stop seeing war of aggressions as acceptable. And I have to bring up Steven Pinker and his work, Our Better Angels, because he makes this point too. I've only picked one out of 100 of his graphs that show that violence has gone down over the centuries, but particularly in this century. So Harari feels that the data justifies him saying the greatest political and moral achievement in modern civilization, that since 1945, it's been rare for international borders to be redrawn, but we're seeing a challenge to that in Ukraine. No country has been completely wiped off the map. Putin thought he was going to do that. And the first 2 decades of this century, fewer people have been killed by violence than by suicide, car accidents, or obesity-related disease. I love this statement. Gunpowder has become less lethal than sugar. And that our thinking, the default is now peace. That's that we want peace, and we accept there should be peace, and that war is implausible. Peace is no longer just the temporary absence of war. Okay, there are exceptions, but he points out that recognizing the rule is at least as important as the exceptions, and he's not going to get diverted by that. But he points out we have to be vigilant to the dangers, in particular his beef with Putin as he's reversing a 78-year-old trend of reducing budgets for arms. And he's worried about a domino effect, especially now the bad guys can use cyber weapons, as we've seen, and maybe we saw in 2016 with the election of Trump. And then, as we were talking about earlier, Homer made the link that AI will make the creation of war economies easier. Yes, Bob.
I expect everybody knows, but having started with Prigozhin, at the point there on your slide of cyber weapons, you mentioned the cyber attack in 2016, the hacking of the Democratic National Committee emails. That was done by the International Internet Organization out of St. Petersburg, which is funded by Prigozhin.
Yes, he is, he started out as a chef, or I think he was like a street vendor. And then he rose in the mafia of St. Petersburg and got into a lot of sidelines, including cyber warfare. And then if that wasn't enough, so he established the Wagner Group and was involved in liberating. And the theory about going around now is that Putin is frightened of him, and that he thinks Prigozhin has political ambitions and wants to take over the country, and he might not just wait to be elected. A guy like Prigozhin. So to see his comeuppance, if you can think of a more evil guy, let me know. Thanks, Bob. So the other final concerns of Harari is, gosh, all this is going to undermine global cooperation at the very moment we need to be cooperating on climate change and regulating artificial intelligence and even genetic engineering. The physicians in this group know that we're in a revolutionary period for medicine, but genetic engineering can be used for malicious purposes. As a final statement, he says if Putin wins, he'll go down as history as worse than Tamerlane, and he'll be known as the man who ruined our greatest achievement just when we were coming out of the jungle. And so he wants to end on an optimistic note. Change is possible and constant. That's a tenet of Buddhism. And that in a way, believing in change is a realism. Of course, people like me were always sensitive to being called naive or utopian. But he sees the change in the possibility of change in Ukraine itself, who endured 2 centuries of Tsarist autocracy. That autocracy finally collapsed in World War I. They had an opportunity after World War I, a brief brush with independence, but that was crushed by the Red Army. Then, as Irene, one of the early members of us from whose ancestors came from Odessa, pointed out, the man-made famine in the 1930s when Stalin tried to collectivize all the farms, these amazingly productive agricultural workers. And then, of course, Ukraine had to survive the Nazi occupation, and our book on Silk Road pointed out that a lot of that occupation had to do with taking the grain in Ukraine and starving the Jews. That's what Hitler had in mind, was starving the Jews. But that's a kind of controversial. But our Silk Road book made a strong argument for that. And I think, as I recall, Snyder had some comments about that as well. And then decades of soul-crushing communist dictatorship. But guess who was where were the leaders from during those decades? Khrushchev was from Ukraine. Brezhnev was from Ukraine. And Gorbachev was from Ukraine. So that's an interesting thing. But nevertheless, the Ukrainians established a democracy, and they refurbished it in 2004 with the elections, where the candidate of the Orange Revolution was poisoned, possibly by Putin. I know that from, and I use this example in my dermatology lectures, that leader was poisoned with an agent that can cause chloracne. So I don't know if you remember the face of the poor guy that was poisoned, but he had led the Orange Revolution. And then again in the Maidan in 2013, and Harari's final point, nothing's written. It comes down to human choices, kind of echoing Lawrence of Arabia, right? Nothing is written. So next week, we'll finally get to China. We've got to spend some time on these current event issues, because I think we are in a hinge moment of history. And so I don't feel too bad leaving poor Cabrillo here in San Diego for another couple of weeks. Okay, so comments.
So what's the plan for next week, John?
China.
China. Okay.
Yeah, because a lot's been happening in China. Earlier at the end of last year, I think it was October, November, we went through what does China want. The Economist had a big thing on what China wants, and that's when Ramsey and I was going to be more active, but unfortunately his grandparent duties have called him away. He's got another grandkid, and we did a kind of deep dive on China and what their grievances were. I could send you links to the videos that Ramsey and I made at the time, but we spent a lot of time on their grievances and what the possible remedies today were, and what does China want, a special issue of the Economist. We went over that in fine detail. But so much has been happening in China, especially now that they're semi-involved in the Putin's misadventure. And of course, they had the zero COVID disaster, and then they're no longer the most populous country in the world. So there's some reasons for that are fascinating. So I thought it would be time to say answer the question what China wants, because it's much clearer now than it was 6 months ago. So does that answer your question, Harold?
Yes, yes, it does. I look forward to that.
John, there's it goes back to the beginning, but there's a Richard Feynman. Anyway, the quote is, "Knowledge isn't free. You have to pay attention." Relevant to today's talk.
Well, I mean, that's I like that model, because you know, I think I've reached an age where I'm looking back, but I still want to pay attention to what's going on. I want to try to make sense of it, and I especially want to try to figure out where the world is going. And I don't understand people who don't pay attention. So I just don't understand it. How could you not be interested in this stuff? And all you guys are, and you show up, and I love it.
This is Carol. I'm really looking forward to China, because it seems the more I read about it, the more complicated it gets. So they have a declining population. Xi's taken over a lot, but he really blew the pandemic response. You know, we need an inside look at that.
Yeah, and so, you know, in writing up and doing research on next week, the most interesting thing I found was the rate of immigration to China. You know, we're worried about China becoming a world leader. For who? They have the lowest immigration rate. So United States is 15%. Japan is low at 2%, but China only has 1/20th of that. And I read a great article that says this thing about racial purity, that's a problem in China, and their rate is 0.2%. Nobody is going to China. Nobody.
John, the country that leads the immigration into China happens to be, wait for it, North Korea.
That's great.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah. One of the leading accepting countries, of course, is Australia, and another Anglophile country, part of the Commonwealth, is Canada. And the United States has a history of immigration. And if you look at the Nobel Prize winners from America, most of them came from other countries, were born in other countries. So, you know, China is going to lead the world. I really? And you see reports of they're in Africa, and I'll talk about how much they're in Africa next week. But Africa isn't in China. The African students that have gone to China have been shunned and impugned, and it's a way. I kind of knew it, you know, and I've seen kind of a little bit of this in Japan, the racial stuff, but China is very insular, and if you look at where they are in world history, right, they're the end of the road before the New World was discovered. They were the end. So they didn't have that many people passing through to anywhere. They were the dead end, and maybe that geography has dictated this. You know, Frankopan's got this new book on the history of and how environment and geology and affects world history. And Jared Diamond did a little bit of this, but I think Frankopan's taking it to a new level with new information. And now Frankopan, by the way, also has written a lot about Ukraine, and that's in the Silk Roads book.
John,
Yeah.
I just comment, you said that we're a nation of immigrants. To put that into we were a colony which expanded through extraction, colonialism, if you will, that became settler colonialism, which expanded westward. So, yeah, there's immigration, but there's also acquisition of lands that would argue against immigration.
Well, both can be true.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive. I'm just saying, when we paint the picture that we're, at the Statue of Liberty and, the famous quote there and, the
give me your tired, your poor.
To be free. Well, you ask a few Mexicans, Americans, and a few Native Americans about that history, they have a different view.
Well, Cabrillo awaits us. If the world will just settle down a little bit, we'll see the history of California and the negative influence of Anglo settlers. And you look at the Chicano movement, and they'll complain that they didn't immigrate, that the boundaries changed, and all of a sudden they found themselves in a foreign country, and so there's something to that. Sure.
The Spanish weren't particularly kind to the indigenous peoples either.
Yes, we're about ready to get into that. So, there's a number of parallel stories, but certainly the history on the East Coast was one of immigration, and a lot of immigrants from Ukraine, right? A lot of Jewish immigrants, and so and a lot of I just finished the Oppenheimer book, and you get immigrants like Teller, the people that come from around the world to. And sure, we got money, we got resources, we've stolen it fair and square. But we've also got a history that has welcomed immigrants. Now, with the exception of 1920 to 1965, where we all of a sudden put the brakes on, and then Trump certainly put the brakes on for many of the same reasons they put the brakes on in the 20s.
There was also the 1880 Chinese Exclusion Act. I mean,
yeah, sure.
Japanese internment. I mean,
Well, that feeds into a number of things. We've had a lot of racism, and we'll certainly get to that when we get to the history of Anglos coming to California and massacring, and I think you can use the term genocide. The Native Americans, Ishi, Yeah, just read how Ishi became the last member of his tribe. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's an interesting country. There's a lot of themes. There's a lot of things that are good, a lot of things that are bad. And together we can explore all those things.
It was interesting to me that my son he was in Taiwan at Taipei for a couple of weeks, and in order to get them down to Bali, they actually had flights from Taipei through mainland China down to Denpasar, which is interesting to me because you think, oh, that with all of this chaos that the Chinese rattling their swords and taking away Taiwan, that's apparently the commerce still keeps going. So they could have gotten visas to stay in China during that time, but so.
Yeah, so a lot of this rhetoric is epiphenomenon. They talk about uncoupling. We haven't uncoupled from China.
No, there's no question about it.
We
Absolutely.
have not uncoupled from China economically, which is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about now, instead of uncoupling, is de-risking, right? So we're not going to trade the sensitive stuff like computer chips, but the other stuff continues and life goes on. Let's hope some of this is just rhetoric. But when we get to China next week, you're going to see there's a lot of nationalism going on there, a lot of nationalism.
Absolutely.
And that's new and it's toxic. And so we've certainly had our and the example, I'll just give you a preview, a teaser. We've certainly had our toxic nationalism, and they've got a Top Gun movie now. And the Economist gave it a review, and it said, unfortunately, this Chinese Top Gun movie is not like the recent Top Gun 2. It's more Top Gun 1 toxicity, and guys cavalierly breaking international law. It's like, God. So we'll be. I hope I live long enough to see whether Harari's right. Ukraine's got to win, and I hope they do. And I take great schadenfreude from today's victory parade.
Good deal.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, John.
Bye, John.
My pleasure.
Thanks.